This episode is brought to you by Adaptive, the software for builders that automates draws, budgets, and bookkeeping with AI. For over a year now, I've been partnered with Adaptive, and they've just been an amazing game changer in terms of efficiency in our time and all our bookkeeping. From the time we get an invoice, we import it into their system. The AI codes it, cost codes it, job codes it. All we have to do is review it, pass it through the people internally in the office, all digitally, and then it gets approved and paid all via ACH. It's becoming extremely fast and saving us countless hours a day and a week. When it comes to draws, all of our budgets now are set in Adaptive as well. So now when we cost code against the draws, we can do our change orders, and then with a click of a button, we can submit these draws to our title companies or to our homeowners for faster payment. If you're looking to save time, and if you're looking to be accurate, I highly recommend Adaptive. Additionally, if you'd like to listen to one of their founders share the story of Adaptive, you can listen to episode number 15 on the Curious Builder podcast. Today in the Curious Builder podcast, we had Kate O'Hara from O'Hara Interiors, and we had a delightful conversation. I've known Kate throughout the years, but at this podcast, I was able to dive a lot deeper, which was really, really enjoyable. And I loved hearing her story of how she used education as a springboard into her business. And we talk a little bit about how she decided to balance leadership versus ownership and taking over O'Hara Interiors, which was a company started by her mother. So we talk a little bit about that dynamic and businesses at large as they seek to figure out how to have succession planning and how you should be thinking about it. And at the end, we talk a little bit about maybe even having a panel of all of these builders and designers, just talking about, the things that we've failed at so that we could be successful. So without further ado, here's Kate O'Hara from O'Hara Interiors. Okay, so I'll hit end recording. Welcome to the Curious Builder podcast. I'm Mark Williams, your host. Today, I have a very special guest on, Minnesota's own Kate O'Hara from O'Hara Interiors. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
So we've met you a few times over the years, touring many parades. You guys have a huge foundation of interior design, especially associated with the Artisan Home Tour and Parade of Homes over the years with kind of the upper echelons of builders. And I've kind of grown up through my career. I've sort of now be able to hopefully work with you because now I'm on the same par as the level of design that you have. So
we would love to work with you. That would be a dream.
Yeah, likewise. Well, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience at large? Obviously, Minnesotans don't need much of an introduction, but a lot of our listeners are across the country, and I know you have an office down in Austin. So why don't you give us a 5-minute recap of O'Hara Interiors and kind of your journey through it so far?
Sure. Well, O'Hara Interiors was founded about 35 years ago by my mother. It was Martha O'Hara Interiors back then, and it was really a Minnesota-specific boutique design firm that she grew with a lot of success, and it gained a lot of popularity. About 15 years ago, I joined the team and had probably my largest impact in the marketing side of things, where we really developed out our website, because that was the thing we had to think about finally, as well as socials. And we took off a bit. We managed to gain some traction with a wider audience beyond the Lakes region. And that led to growth. It led to growth of our team internally, and then also opening an office down in Austin, Texas, where we had a lot of family and friends, and one thing was leading to another. So we opened an office there, and that has met with a lot more success for us. So we've really been fortunate over the years. About 5 years ago, my mom decided to pass the baton to me, and I took leadership of the company just in time for the pandemic. So that was an interesting ride in learning to lead. But we've come out of it, I think, a better business than we entered, and we're here today, kind of really feeling fortunate for where we are.
That's great. So much to dive into here. One of the things that I was curious, I just really like slogans and I like sayings. And one of the things that it mentioned about Martha O'Hara before it switched over to O'Hara Interiors was that Martha, it said, left the boardroom for the showroom. What was kind of the show? What was the impetus behind that storyline?
Well, Martha grew up in a small town in Tennessee. So she has those Southern roots. And her father, my grandfather, was really successful in small business and entrepreneurship. He seemed to just do really well no matter what he was doing, and he opened a number of businesses. So I think she always had that entrepreneurial bug, and I know she did because she's told me she did. So she went to school for accounting. She became an accountant for one of the big firms, but always had an eye toward something that she might do one day. And after her and my father's career took them from one house to another, from one state to another, over a period of a decade or so, she decided, you know what, I actually love working on these homes, and I think I could really make something of it. So she let my dad know that we wouldn't be moving anymore because she was planting some roots in the Twin Cities so that she could start Martha O'Hara Interiors.
Oh, that's okay. That's interesting. I just liked that tagline where it showed up in your bio, and I was like, there's got to be a good story there. Well, I was looking back online just a little bit about even your origin, because I don't know you super well, but I saw that you had gone to the Carlson School of Management, and I was there for a short time in like 2003, 2004. Was that a similar time frame to you as well, or no?
For me, it was a bit later. So
Okay.
after my college experience, I did get a master's degree. I thought I would be pursuing a career in education, and so my first graduate degree was in education. But a decade later, or almost a decade later, in I think about 2013, so it was about 10 years after you, Martha, my mom, said, it seems like you're in a lot of these financially oriented, strategy oriented meetings, and I happen to know that you have not so much as taken an accounting course because I really wanted you to. So I think you need to get some more formal education. It was always formal education was something that is something that my mom has always really prioritized. And so she suggested pretty firmly that I get my MBA, and I had to really reflect on whether I wanted to leave the company in order to do it. And instead, I decided to do the executive MBA program, which allowed me to keep working full time and pursue the degree.
Isn't it interesting when you talk to people, especially business owners, they come from such surprising backgrounds that at this point, I'm actually more surprised if they come from a building background than if they come from anything else, because almost everyone you talk to comes from, like I love education. I've often mentioned that if I wasn't a builder or an entrepreneur, I would be an educator. And not that I feel like I have a lot to educate people on. I just love the teaching environment. I used to be a cross country coach for about 10 years before I had kids. And I just really enjoyed coaching. I think maybe coaching. And somehow I find education analogous to coaching. And anyway, hearing that you have an education background is really fun. And sometimes what comes out in the podcast is I interviewed someone once, and they're an interior designer, and they actually had a psychology degree. And I was like, wow, that's very useful, because I feel like as a builder or an interior designer or an architect, I think we all have honorary psychology degrees, because we're trying to figure out what it is exactly that our clients are thinking, and we're reading between the lines, because not everyone is A to B communicator. Some people tend to be A, F, Z, Y, back to B, and you're like, oh, okay, I've got to guess what they really want here. So
right.
I mean, would you echo that, as other business owners, that some of them, that it seems like more often than not, people have a more diverse background than you often would think?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no question in my mind that having that accounting background really teed Martha up for a lot of success in launching and running a successful small business. And I think that my degree kind of unexpectedly has made me a better manager of people, because I have learned how people learn, what motivates, progression. And it's, kids and adults are different, but the way that people learn is, there are correlations there. And so I think that my comfort in that made me probably a little bit better at just understanding kind of how the whole organism of a company is going to work. And when you're starting a company, it's 1, 2, maybe 3 people. But by the time I was stepping in to run O'Hara Interiors, we were, in the over 15 people range, and now we're over 30. So that is different. It's still a small business. Absolutely. We're still very close, and we see each other every week, sometimes via Zoom and sometimes in person. but it does require a different mindset than the entrepreneur who's just getting started or keeping things pretty small.
I think it's interesting. I find it very encouraging. And one of the things that we talk about a lot on the podcast is, financial acuity, and knowing that your mom was a former, accountant. And I know a lot of builders that had corporate careers or had financial careers, and then they've gotten into building and have done very well because, I used to say the saying a lot. Actually, it was something my dad taught me growing up, is like, you could be good at builder, you could be a good designer and bad at business, and you won't make it. And you could be a bad builder or a bad designer, but good at business, and you could make it. And hopefully you're a good builder and a good designer and good at business, that you're both.
Yeah.
But honestly, if you can't run a business, or if you don't have a higher level of, financial acuity and understanding, like, it doesn't matter how talented you are, you're going to go out of business. And so I found that it's very encouraging to see people come into our industry and do well because they have good financial understanding. And I also think that, just financial literacy in terms of like what to charge and how to charge. And, one of the things that I know for builders, I'd be curious to get your perspective from the interior design field. I feel like my entire career I've undercharged. I feel like I've finally reached the point where I understand my value, and my value proposition isn't for everyone. In fact, this week I had, there was 3 people that I had to turn aside, not because I wanted to, but simply that the work that they are attracted to cannot be done for the price that they are willing to pay. And they knew that. They even said in their email, I suspect that I can't afford the work, but we like your work and we'd like to reach out to you. Can you respond a little bit from the interior designer's point of view, like how you've seen even your career and how do you think that's fair that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think that, it's one of the most difficult things. Interior design is an industry that is, I always say we're a small business with enterprise level problems. Builders are the same. It means that we need to really, and it's very difficult to understand what an appropriate rate is because it varies so widely regionally, and because designers work so differently. Some people will say 2 different people can say they're a full service designer, and that yet their process and services might look quite different from one to the next. So it is a real conundrum when you are trying to price yourself appropriately, and you have to do the math. You have to look at what is required for this business to run and run well, and for me to get paid, and for this to be successful and sustainable. But then at some point, you also have to get comfortable knowing your worth and knowing that saying no to something leaves space for the right next thing rather than just to fill that gap. I think that is one of the greater challenges of somebody who's really successful as an entrepreneur and starting up in sales is that you're very good at saying yes. I think one of the difficult things to learn, and some of the top tier, executors, whether they are builders, designers, architects, or so on, is they have gotten good at knowing when to say this isn't a good fit. Maybe because of billing, but maybe because of a variety of other things. It takes a lot of confidence to turn away somebody who's ready to write you a check. And yet the willingness to do that is sometimes one of the best things you can do for your business.
I 100% agree. I think it's funny because lately I've been really sort of interested in identifying my ideal client, which sort of also coincides with understanding yourself and your own business worth and propositions and all those things. And I recently was listening to a podcast called Founders that I really, really enjoy. And the interviewer just interviews or reads books about, famous entrepreneurs like Rockefeller, Steve Jobs, Warren Buffett. And one of his biggest things is what you just said. I think Warren Buffett's advice to another company that he was considering buying or just mentoring was simply learning how to say no. And he basically was saying, I say no to most things. And I actually heard this morning, I was meeting a potential investor over coffee, and he basically said, if it's not a heck yes, then it's a hard no. And basically he's only saying yes to the things like he is emphatically like yes. And I really appreciate that. And you're right. You look at people that you look around your community, people that have done very well financially, and they seem relaxed. They seem like they have time. And, it's funny. I have 3 small kids. So maybe it's just the fact that I have 3 small kids and I've got a thousand interests, and it's also a bit of my personality trait, definitely undiagnosed ADHD. Yeah. So that could be part of it. But like, I look around and I really appreciate people that are sort of calm and they sort of can wait for the opportunities to come to them. And I don't know how much of that comes with like age and wisdom, because the people I'm thinking of are all older. The gentleman this morning is probably in his 60s. And so I just think it's admirable when the messaging out there teaches people to be like, you don't have to chase every ball down the street. You don't have to, you mentioned earlier in your career, let's call it kind of a strapping business. Like you kind of say yes to everything because you sort of feel like you have to.
And you sort of do. You sort of do have to.
Yeah. And you chase so many projects that in hindsight, you're like, oh man, was that? But you don't know, because you're also, it's hard to discount that because honestly, you're learning a lot too. And I don't know, it's hard to quantify the value of the education that you're actually getting. And I have lately said this a lot too, just that I think you can pay for an education 2 ways. One is with money and one is through experience. And both are valuable and both have their place. And hopefully public forums like a podcast, like education, like books, hopefully we can learn from each other so we can maybe avoid some of the more expensive mistakes. But honestly, I look back, that's really what I do, is just share. I share where I've fallen flat on my face. I'm surprised my nose isn't enough flatter because I have a pretty pointy nose considering how many times I've fallen on my proverbial face. So
yeah, well, and I think that there is something to understanding that, there is an importance to saying no. It is also a privilege when you get to that point that you can, because you can't right away. It can be, the absolute wrong choice to say no at one point in your career, and then the best choice you can make for yourself. And understanding when that tipping point is starting to occur is really important. And I can think back on certain things that we said no to that kind of, I wish we'd said yes. But when I think about it, it's like, I think, no, I'm thinking about it from where we are now. Now we could say yes, because now we could handle that volume of work. We could handle that, whatever that project was that we felt we probably can't do this, and this could hurt our reputation. So there are moments early in your career where you feel like you have to say yes to everything, and you probably do. And yet you're also forming your reputation. And so you might find yourself needing to say no to the things that you truly know you cannot handle. And then you reach a point where you can start saying yes to those things and no to the others. But I think to your point, the other side of that coin, of that ability to be a little bit relaxed, is that when you reach that tipping point, you probably have a team or people or agency, or you've got something and someone working behind the scenes, probably not actually behind the scenes, but from anyone looking at you, that standpoint, behind the scenes, to bring those opportunities your way. So by the time you're able to really start saying no with confidence, you've got pipelines, you've got various sources of, you might have a really incredible repeat and referral, pipeline. You might have a lot of clients coming in from your socials or your email marketing or all of the business development and in-person networking you're doing. There's so many ways and avenues you can take. And by the time you're able to start saying no, I think you've probably come to understand what really works for you in terms of making sure that that pipeline's there. And that's when you can relax just a little bit, but only a little bit.
How much of your saying no do you think ends up being like a gut feeling or initial reaction? And where I'm going with this is, I look back now, it's easy. Hindsight's super easy, right? Man, I should have done that differently. But it's like, I think of some of the jobs I chased the hardest were the ones I should have let go. And so, and it's kind of like and because a lot of entrepreneurs have a very strong willpower, sometimes you can will things into existence, which is good. There are times where it obviously is successful. I think of, starting a business or keeping a business going, a lot is willpower. And so it's like, you sort of need that. Sometimes do you feel like let's call it the distortion factor. Do you ever get caught up in your own distortion factor where your own worst enemy is yourself?
Sure.
in terms of like what you say yes to and what you say no to, and how do you look to other people on your team to sort of help keep you kind of on the mission objective or the goals of the company?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I can just think back to so many moments in my career. There was a moment in my career where I kept track of how many new projects we were bringing in per month, and that was a signal of success. But volume, we're not a volume business. We're a luxury business. So what were we doing there, or what was I doing there? So there have been moments where I've used the wrong data points or KPIs to sort of say this means success. And I think that sometimes the loftiness of a project, especially on paper, how it looks, what it might represent, can sort of put those rose-colored glasses over your eyes. You can start to forget to look at, is this a good fit for our services, flat out? And is it like feasibility-wise, timeline, services, the availability of the team, how feasible is this right now? But then also, is the budget in line with what, our expectations aligned, basically? And then, there is that kind of it factor, right? Where you just have to see, like, does it feel good? Does it feel appropriate? But I think I like to look at feasibility and aligned expectations first. And then if there's certain red flags I look for that I think we're pretty much all familiar with, that as they arise. If I'm talking to a client, for instance, who has realistic expectations all throughout the conversation, except in our very first conversation, they're already negotiating with me. That's a red flag. That's a big red flag, because I'm already getting a sense that they may not value our services and time. And if they don't value it from the start, then why will they value it at any point moving forward? This will just be a continuing conversation in all likelihood. So yeah, I think though that where that kind of echo chamber can really occur is when, you're talking to someone and they're saying, well, and we have exciting friends and we're thinking this might be Arc Digest, or we think, you start hearing these words that are just music to your ears. And, it's like probably like dating someone for the first time and missing those red flags. It's easy to do, but it's really, really important, I think, to actually have a methodical way to vet your clients. It's nice to sit down and just say, I get a good feel from them. And maybe that's one of your data points, but there needs to be really specific, there should be, like, we kind of have a checklist of things that we look for. And there are certain deal breakers. And then there are certain things that are more like, I haven't gone quite so far as to create a cumulative score, but I know a designer who does in New York. And I'm thinking about adopting something similar because I think it makes just a ton of sense to say, all right, if these deal breakers are not in play, then these other variables that make for an ideal client, they get scored on each of them. And if it's over, 80%, we're a go. And if it's under 50, probably not a good fit.
Yeah, that's interesting. I recently decided, we'll see if I can hold true to this. I've decided that, like, even internal, I am such an optimist. I've been joking lately for those watching this on YouTube or the clip, if this comes out versus the audio, is like I got my hands in a temple format. But like I operate at optimism and delusion. Like I'm like right at the apex of those two things, which makes me a really good remodeler and really good energy creator and getting people excited for their projects. And I tend to just really like and enjoy people. It makes me probably not the best judge of character for people. And where I'm going with this is that, like a good interview style is to mirror people's body language, right? And I've adopted that through sales. Like, I have a harder time probably being quiet. So if I'm with a stereotypical engineer, someone who's quieter, I have to calm down a little bit versus someone who's in sales. Like, obviously I can get more amplified. But when I hire people, now looking back, maybe some hires that didn't work out so great, I realized that I was basically telling them what to tell me, and then they told me what I told them to tell me, and then I loved them for it. But basically, I was just hiring a puppet because they were just doing. Anyway, I've joked with my team. We have a very small team. We're 4 people, and I've joked with my team that I will, for the foreseeable future, will not hire anybody again. I will have my team is going to be responsible for interviewing them, and then there's 4 of us. I'm going to keep a non-voting vote, and I have a team of 3, and they get to vote. And I don't know how it's going to go. Where I'm going with this is, how as owners do we sometimes have to set up, like, I'm victim of my own personality. And so my new safety net is to let my team hire the people on our team. So you're kind of having this culture where they sort of get to predict their own culture. You're a team of 30. That's a lot. As you've grown as a company, how have you been able to develop and hire and good people? And do you have to, how do you go through that process and sort of, make sure that you're getting the right people?
Hiring is one of the most important things that you do when you're running a business, especially a small business. So we have a process. You'll hear that a lot from me. I think being the person who inherited a business that had been built and run by my mother, who, everything kind of passed by her desk. There were some processes, there were some procedures, but it was mostly run it through Martha. And I thought, this isn't going to scale. The bottleneck is clearly on one desk, and this isn't going to scale. So we need to be able to delegate out, but we also want to ensure our team experiences a consistent culture and a healthy culture, and that our clients have a really consistent luxury-oriented experience. So on the hiring side, I actually quite enjoy this part. We write a job description for every single job. I make sure that it's reviewed by multiple team members, anybody who's going to be impacted by this person. What are we missing? Are we missing anything? And then we post online, and we post to a few different platforms. I think that it's really incumbent upon us to make sure that we're getting as diverse a candidate pool as possible. So we don't just go to one place. We ensure that we're posting with various schools, various organizations, and various platforms to make sure that we do have, we cast a wide net so that we really have the opportunity to bring a lot of different people and perspectives into our company. And then from there, I generally will conduct phone interviews. I will be the first interview, which I might surprise people, but from there, that I will narrow it down to probably 2 or 3 candidates. And from there, it moves to the team. And then our candidates will go through an in-person interview where they meet no fewer than 3 people on our team, sometimes 4, through like 2 interviews on the same day. We're not trying to drag people through, hours and hours of nonsense. And where we can, for design roles and roles that have like some specific performance needs, we'll usually have them do an exercise. So in a copywriting role, they might actually have to write something during the interview time. We're not asking them to go home and do homework or produce something we're going to sell. For designers, they might wind up doing an anonymous CAD exercise. We'll need them, pepperoni and cheese and anchovy. And there will be one person in charge of the names and another person or 2 actually assessing. And that's helped a lot. Those more activity-based assessments, because we do really try to hire the person, not the skill. But sometimes the person can mask a real deficit in skill that we can't quite absorb. So that's really been kind of our method. And then, we go from there.
I kind of like that. I like the fact that you would have, kind of a practical, especially somebody who likes to, like right now, I'm sort of into my walking meetings. We're in downtown Excelsior. So, if I can get someone on the team and be like, hey, let's grab a notepad, let's just walk around the block and, sort of some motion while you're doing it. But my brain is spinning. I'm thinking like, how fun would it be if your first interview was to go, depending on the position, obviously, but go to like a random coffee shop and be like, I want you to engage the stranger and just have a conversation with them about, home building or running a business, and just see how they act. Like, what is their interpersonal communication skills? Because honestly, for me personally, I think communication is probably my number one priority. for my people, and probably one that I prioritize the highest. Now, to your point, if I'm hiring a project manager or builder, and they know nothing about construction, but they're a phenomenal communicator, I'm going to have to take a second look. That being said, I wonder if I would have the guts to hire somebody that had zero construction, because, you hear all the time that you can educate, but there are certain things, some people skills that might take a lot longer to develop than, learning, about plans or CAD drawings or something like that. Have you ever taken a swing on somebody that was just extremely strong as a person, but very weak in a skill set? And then you thought, you know what, I'm going to stay with it long term because I think they can learn the skill, but their people skills are so strong that we're going to hire them anyway?
Yeah, we have. I would say in general, we're looking for people who have either an educational or, probably more importantly, a bit of work experience in the realm that we're hiring for. It depends a bit on the role, though. But yeah, we have done that. And, from my perspective, when it comes to hiring, I want to hire people who I trust and who are self-reflective and who are good communicators. If someone cannot tell me about what they've done wrong or negative feedback that they've gotten before, if someone tells me I've never gotten negative feedback before, there is a 0.1% likelihood that we're going to be hiring them. Right. If someone can't tell me something they feel like they should be working on, same is true. And it's not a gotcha moment. In fact, we sometimes will send, we haven't done this recently, but we went through a trial, and I actually liked it quite a lot, where we would send most, but not all of the interview questions to our interviewees in advance. Because from my perspective, it depends on the role, but if I'm hiring someone for accounting and finance, they don't need to be really good at off the cuff random questions. They need to be good at a very specific set of skills. So sending someone, I want people to come to us with their best selves. There are very few jobs, although they do exist, where people need to be just on it and always ready with a good response. And if that's that role, we might not be sending those questions out, or we might send fewer out in advance. But I don't think we are getting a great assessment of someone if they're coming in nerves this high and already intimidated because they're talking to two people rather than one, and so on. So we'll try different things. But yeah, to your point, if I were given two candidates and one had the greatest skill set in the world, but they could not tell me about anything they ever improved upon or needed to improve upon, and I didn't get the sense that they were going to be someone I could trust, and trust can extend in a lot of different directions. And then I had someone else come in with a very low skill set, but I thought, I can trust this person. I can see the energy they're bringing. They're great communicators, and wow, can they reflect and talk about what yes, I received this feedback and here's what I did, and etc. I know who I'm hiring, and it's not the skill set. It would be, to hire the person with a skill set, they would have to be one of a very few people in the state who had that skill set. So, right. I didn't have a choice otherwise.
That's funny. How one of the things I don't want to lose sight of, just because we talked about it a little bit before we came on, is I would love to talk. We've had a lot of father and sons, husband and wives on as a business. I've had a number of father and sons on where they're sort of in the middle of the transition. The son is going to maybe take it over, the family member, and it's so many businesses that are, especially in the construction world. I think right now I heard a stat that there's 10,000 baby boomers retiring every day. And I don't know the actual number, but let's call it 4/5 of every business is probably owned by someone in that demographic. So there's a lot of businesses coming up for sale right now, and probably have been for the last 5 years and probably will be for the next 15 years. And, I don't know where you're at and how much you're welcome to share or not share, whatever you wish. But just knowing that there's a lot of businesses out there that need to talk about succession planning. They need to think about, how do you buy a family business? What if you don't want to buy a business? There's a lot of pressures both ways. Sometimes I'm thinking about myself as a dad. My kids are pretty young, 8, 6, and 4. So I have quite a ways to think about it. But, I'm already thinking about it. Like, man, if they're really passionate about it, I'll find out, probably another 10 years, and I'll have to start maybe making some different business decisions. Or, as a kid, sometimes there's pressure like, oh man, I have to take over this business. I don't really want to, but my family's sort of pressuring me. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience? At like, at what point did you know, as your mom had this business, that you wanted to be in it? And walk us through some of those dynamics. I think it'd be really educational.
Sure. Yeah, it was it was a somewhat gradual process for us. I would say probably around 10 years ago, it had always been mentioned from time to time. Well, if Kate ever wants to. But I had been getting a degree in education. I hadn't thought that no one thought that I would be taking over this business growing up. However, when I started working for the company, it would get mentioned from time to time, but in passing, sometimes in a lighthearted way, because there still was this thought like, no, she's of course not going to. But about 10 years ago, the question became a lot more serious, as in, Kate, I need to know if you're interested in this. And that was a fair question. But I had to push back and say, well, I need to know that you're asking that you are offering me a job and not, proposing the equivalent of marriage over here, because you're asking me to take over leadership of this company. So there is a distinction that I think is important. There's leadership and ownership. And so the initial conversations were about leadership, as opposed to ownership. And I mean, the ownership conversation is a whole other conversation. But I'm going to talk about transitioning leadership to start, because that was the sort of opening, volley, the opening conversation is, are you going to lead this? And it was very important to me that I be able to take over leadership of the company, knowing that I could leave, so long as I was not, so long as I was still an employee. Because what if a great opportunity came along? But also because I don't want to hate this job, as in, I want to be choosing this every day, just like every other employee does. I don't want to feel an obligation or like I'm responsible for, my family's, legacy or something like that in a greater way than the job already represents. So for me, a really big part of the conversation was understanding, what's your plan B? I need to know that if something comes along, I know my mom would never want me to turn up a great opportunity for myself. So then what would the plan B, look like? And we needed to have a conversation about that. And that led to larger conversations about, succession planning and so on. And I think that, to answer kind of the initial question about, how to think about and when to think about those things, I think it's, within your first year of business, frankly. And I don't think anyone who hasn't thought about it is way behind. But just as you create plans, what's your 3 to 5 year plan? What's your, go on and on plan? Every business owner should have some sort of exit strategy, whatever that looks like. It might look like, here's how we would, pass it on. It might look like, here's how we would sell it. It might look like a number of, here's how we would wind it down. A lot of small business owners do a lot of different things, but you are in a much, much more stable position as a company if you're already thinking about that and talking to people who are experts in the field, because there are people who specialize in this part of business, and any one of them will tell you that they want to know with years notice, not with 6 months notice, that you're ready to do this thing, because there's a lot to consider. If you are getting ready to sell your business, there's a lot that you might need to do to make it appealing to potential buyers. And if you're looking to transition your business to the next generation, well, there's quite a bit internally that might have to be done to make sure that things can transition smoothly, and so on. So there were kind of these two conversations going on. There was the job offer conversation where I was like, I think I did take my mom by surprise when I said that, because she was thinking in terms of her legacy, and I was thinking in terms of, well, this is the moment we're in now, but then also we need to think about that legacy and how that transitions. So they were separate from my standpoint.
I like that you broke it out, the difference between leadership and ownership. And I'm thinking of a good friend of mine who is a dermatology specialist, a Mohs surgeon in the Carolinas, and he had a chance to buy into his practice. And it was a significant amount of money to buy into his practice. And the win is you're an owner of the company, you get, a share of the profits and all that stuff. He elected not to because he wanted flexibility. So he took the leadership role, not the ownership role. And then actually last year, he and his family took a year off of work. They took a sabbatical and they traveled the world. And he never would have been able to do that with his family had he taken ownership. And who's to say what he'll do down the road? But looking as his friend on, like obviously there's a part of me that's like, oh man, that looks really amazing. I would love to.
Nice.
I would really love to do that. And anyway, to me, that's the thought that comes to that. And I've always said it from a parent's point of view that I just want my kids to be passionate. And if they're like, I want them to be passionate about this because this is a hard, and honestly, all businesses are really hard. They can be really great. Just because something's hard doesn't make it's not worthwhile, right? I mean, marriage, for goodness sakes. I mean, marriage is hard. Good marriage is, your parents don't ever tell you how hard marriage is. And then you're a parent one day and you get married and you're like, wow, marriage is really hard. But and good ones are. And it's not a negative thing because I'm a big runner, running a marathon or an ultra marathon or whatever distance you decide to run, it's hard. But guess what? You keep doing it because the value statement you have on yourself and the feeling you have while doing it. And so hard is hard. And so, regardless of what you think hard is, it's still hard for that person. And one of the things why I love talking about business so much is it's so analogous to so many parts of our lives. And, it's a reflection of a lot of our values and a lot of our feelings. So anyway, I really appreciated how you delineated the two. How did you then decide that after you were a leader for a while, you decided you wanted to be an owner? Or did you know right away after these conversations happened that you were willing to do both? This episode is brought to you by Pella Northland. For 19.5 years, I've been building homes, and 95% of all of my homes have used Pella windows. I couldn't be happier to call them a partner in our builds and our remodels. Whether you're an architect, a designer, or a remodeler, I'd highly recommend Pella windows. They can fit old homes, new homes, reclaimed, commercial, and really everything in between. Pella is a company that we trust and that we recommend to our clients. Additionally, in management, Peter and Ed have just been absolute fantastic people to work with, as well as mentors to me personally. So when it comes time to look for a window, I'd highly recommend Pella windows. Find more at pellanorthland.com. Also, if you're interested, you can hear episode 1 where I interview Peter and Ed together for a great listen on business and Pella windows.
I didn't know right away because, it was a completely different role and a completely different, I say completely different. It's not like I spun a 180, right, in terms of what I was doing. I had been involved behind the scenes in a lot of the same things that, CEO, creative director type role entailed. But now the responsibility was firmly and fully on my shoulders. And that changes. I mean, I think a lot of people have experienced working within a company and your role, you get a promotion or your role changes. Now the dynamic changes a little bit. And so I think I wanted to make sure that would go okay. And particularly since I am Martha's daughter, there's a specific dynamic to that as well. I've always been very aware of, the fact that I am Martha's daughter. And so I need to really show up every day. I really need to, I don't just need to earn it in her eyes. I need to earn it in everyone's eyes because these are the people that one day I might be managing and then leading. So, I think I stepped in knowing that there was a likelihood of that we would move from leadership to ownership, but I also really started focusing on leadership. And I would say I couldn't tell you. There wasn't just a moment where I was like, this is it. It just, for me, happened gradually. But of course, I took over. I mean, doing a little bit of math here, I took over 6 months before the pandemic. So I've been leading through a lot of chaos and, kind of times of crisis, whether we're talking about the pandemic itself or all the supply chain issues that we and your industry are still dealing with, although they're thankfully, we're on the mend. And so it's been busy, it's been very busy.
It's funny you say that. So we had, and I know you've worked with them in the past, but we had JK and Sons on, so John, Gary, and Jeff. And it was interesting to hear, their story. I think they had shared, I think Jeff came on in like 2009. And, I think John had started in 2008 or somewhere around that time. But the point of it is one of the things that I like to combat, sometimes people that don't own businesses or don't know the difficulties of a transition in family, is you hear this thing like, oh, so-and-so got the business handed to them. And personally, I hate that, because they're so undervaluing what that even means. And I understand it's a stereotype, and honestly, I don't know where it even comes from, frankly. But I'm not the only one that's ever heard that. But I look at people, and the reason I'm thinking about this and bringing up this story is you started right before, one of the great recessions. We've had two in our lifetime of, whatever. I can't keep track of all the great, and whichever recession is bigger than the worst one. And so they're all just recessions. But like, you learn so much during that time about yourself, about your leadership. And in this case, while the recession was super challenging, or COVID was really challenging in terms of supply chain issues, it wasn't a challenge in terms of sales, because everyone was at home trapped in a box and wanted to do stuff. So in hindsight, we're like, wow, everyone, if someone said, hey, you could have as much sales as you want, most people would say, sign me up for it. But having gone through it, like, it was messy. Everyone did a pretty poor job. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, we all would love some do-overs on that. And, for me, I started about 4 years before 2008, and going back to the Kramers, in some ways, John really started, even though he was the third generation, because his grandpa was a builder too, is like, in some ways, that was kind of his trial by fire. And I feel like if you're in business long enough, you are still going to get the entrepreneurial trial by fire. I'm sure history has plenty of examples of, second sons and daughters, or second generations, third generations that fail because they didn't learn some of the principles that their four founders maybe had to go through. But I look at these trials as like a huge battleground and testing ground that if you come through them, as you've already mentioned, you've navigated and you've come out the other side bigger. I mean, you're at 30 employees. I bet you if you asked Martha O'Hara in 2012, you'd be at 30 employees. She would have been like, what? Why? Number one. And two, like, really? That's amazing. And then you're in other states. And I guess the only reason I'm bringing this up is just how important these trials are to our own personal development. And so anyway, kudos to you for making hay with what you've got.
Well, thank you. And likewise, I mean, I think, it's very easy. It's so easy. I've been to conferences. I've heard people speak. I almost always get a little panicky at some point during a conference, because everyone goes up on stage and talks in absolutes and says, if you're not doing this, your business is going to fail. And you're thinking, I'm not doing exactly that. And so I've had so many of those moments that I think it's just so important to acknowledge that we're always on our website, on our socials, we're always putting our best face forward, and we're trying to do our best to represent ourselves well. But it doesn't mean we're not working hard behind the scenes, and it doesn't mean that it hasn't come without its struggles. And we've all hit every business. I mentioned to you earlier, I think that businesses that are on a growth module, and not every business needs to or wants to grow. Some businesses say, we are very profitable and very happy exactly where we are, and so this is where we'll stay. And that's lovely. I mean, that I champion that. But for businesses that want to grow, you have to go into it knowing that you will hit milestones, and they will be moments of great celebration and great growing pains. And the team that got you to one milestone may not look exactly the same as the team that gets you to the next, because it takes different skill sets and mindsets sometimes. And you will also